There is always such a thing as being too advanced for an era. In the sports world, that usually boils down to a dude who is recognized as a pioneer but was simply playing in the wrong time frame of the sport. Think for a second Reggie Miller, a shooter, a great shooter, who could draw fouls very well and get to the basket. That is a perfect skill set for the modern NBA. However, he was handicapped by playing in the 90s and early aughts where, let's just say, it was looked down upon to chuck it from the three-point line as such. Reggie Miller was simply too far ahead of his time frame. And now young fans look to him as a man out of time, and old heads look to him as a dude that they claim would be a demigod in the modern era. This video, though, is not about Reggie Miller. This video is about another man, far too advanced for his time, but in the world of the gridiron. A man who most certainly would be viewed in a different light today, with his skill set, with his athleticism, and all that good stuff that modern quarterbacks are almost required to have at this point. This is an era where quarterback mobility is not only accepted, but the standard for many coaches. So, without further ado, let's get into this man out of time, Kordell Stewart. Roll the intro.
I don't really have a good intro right now, but on this channel I like to talk sports.
Kordell Stewart was born on October 16, 1972, in Marrero, Louisiana, a suburb of New Orleans. His upbringing would be tough. His father worked long hours in a variety of different jobs to make ends meet, and when Kordell was only 12 years old, his mother would pass away after a long battle with liver cancer. With Kordell's eventual nickname being Slash, he in fact would sometimes call himself Slash Jr. in interviews as a tribute to his father, who he said was a barber slash house painter slash carpenter. Stewart would kickstart his athletic career as a quarterback at John Ehret High School in Marrero. He would have an outstanding career there as a quarterback. In 1990, he would be named New Orleans Player of the Year while making the All-State team in Louisiana. With all that happening in his senior year of high school, it was not long before colleges started knocking on his door. He would decide to go to the University of Colorado in 1991 under Bill McCartney's very option-heavy offense. While he did not see much time as a freshman, he would have only 2 passes and 18 rushes throughout that season. Stewart would become the team's starting quarterback in his sophomore year. He would then pay them back in kind, setting a new school record with 2,109 yards passing and tying the record of touchdown passes with 12. However, he would have 9 interceptions on the season as well. In 1993, he would break his own passing yards record, throwing for 2,299 and 11 touchdowns that season, playing the entire year with a fractured bone in his left hand as well. After the 1993 season, Stewart would work closely with Rick Neuheisel, who was an offensive assistant for the team, and future head coach after McCartney's retirement after 1994. Neuheisel had been a graduate assistant and quarterbacks coach at UCLA just a few years prior. Most notably, he had worked with the likes of Troy Aikman in the program. During the summer of his senior year, Stewart would work often with Neuheisel, trying to improve his skills as a quarterback. In Stewart's words himself, Stewart, in a later interview with Sports Illustrated, said that, quote, If I had had Neuheisel as a coach since my freshman year, I would have gone in the first round. He taught me about coverages and gave me confidence. The tutelage paid off. Colorado would go 11-1 that season, one of those wins being the iconic Miracle at Michigan, one of the greatest Hail Marys in college history. With a scant few seconds on the clock, on Colorado's own 27-yard line, Stewart would throw a Hail Mary almost 70 yards in the air to the Michigan 2-yard line. It would then bounce off of defensive backs Ty Law and Chuck Winters and into the arms of Colorado receiver Michael Westbrook. Colorado would win that game, 27-26, walking off the team in the big house. In the season, Stewart would have 2,071 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions. He would also have 639 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Colorado would then meet Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl and dominate, 41-24. Stewart would be named the game's MVP, with 226 passing yards and 143 rushing yards. After his senior year, he would declare for the NFL draft. Stewart's combine numbers would be highly impressive, running a low 4.5 40-yard dash and having a 36-inch vertical. However, there were questions about his position. Not only was that athleticism skewing the perception in the minds of some coaches, he was very, very far from the traditional quarterback mold at the time. For one, he was black, in an era where black quarterbacks were still far from the norm and still kind of stigmatized by an older generation of coaches. For two, he wasn't very tall, relatively. He was 6'1", which was still far from the ideal height for a quarterback at the time, still kind of is to this day, and the stigma of short quarterbacks was still very alive and active. However, Stewart was adamant about his position in the next level. Before the draft in an interview, he would state, "I can do a lot of different things, but my main thing is to be a quarterback, and it will always be." With the 60th pick in the 1995 NFL Draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers would select Stewart. This Steelers team was pretty damn good. They had gone 12-4 in the previous year, making it to the AFC Championship but losing to the Chargers. They already had their starting quarterback solidified with Neil O'Donnell under center, but coach Bill Cowher decided to take Stewart anyway, if nothing else for the athleticism and versatility he would provide. That athleticism was proven in one of their first ever training camps. In a sprint drill that was usually dominated by speedster wide receiver Yancey Thigpen, Stewart was stride for stride with him, the fourth string quarterback, and with many other roles to come, kept stride for stride with him. This kind of proved what they wanted. Cowher knew that they needed to get Stewart playing time in any way possible, even if he was buried on the depth chart as a quarterback. Stewart would also agree. Even though he insisted on his main thing being a quarterback, he just wanted to see the field no matter what. And this is where the Slash nickname would come from. The nickname of Slash can be traced back to Steelers color commentator Myron Cope, rest in peace, as he presumed Stewart could play multiple positions effectively, being a quarterback / wide receiver / running back. In Stewart's rookie year, he was listed as a receiver, but saw snaps at all three positions. He would finish his rookie campaign with 5 completions for 60 yards and a touchdown, rushing 15 times for 86 yards and a touchdown, averaging 5.7 yards per carry, and catching 14 passes for 235 yards and a touchdown. In the playoffs, the Steelers would make it all the way to the Super Bowl, Cordell catching a critical go-ahead touchdown in the AFC Championship to help propel them there. However, in the Super Bowl, they would lose to the Cowboys, 27-17. Going into the next season, Stewart was still positionless, seeing snaps at all three of those skill positions once again. However, it is notable that he was bumped up on the quarterback depth chart after Neil O'Donnell left in free agency to the Jets. And it is also worth mentioning that even though he saw very, very few snaps, relatively speaking, teams were still terrified of the skill set he provided, and would game plan specifically for him and those few snaps that he would take. Stewart, throughout the season, would have 11 completions off of 30 attempts for 100 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 picks. On the ground, though, he had 39 rushes for 171 yards and 5 touchdowns, including an 80-yard touchdown when he was lined up as a quarterback, which was the longest QB run for a touchdown in NFL history at the time. He would also catch 17 passes for 293 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Steelers would make the playoffs, blowing out Indy in the wild card 42-14, but then losing in the divisional 28-3 to the New England Patriots. 1997 is when the team would fully commit to Slash as a quarterback. He would beat out Mike Tomczak for the starting role on the team, and in his first year starting full-time at quarterback, no other bells nor whistles, just him under center, he threw for 3,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, rushed for 476 yards, and 11 more touchdowns. However, he did turn the ball over a lot, throwing 17 interceptions and fumbling 6 times. The Steelers would go 11-5 with him at the head, making it all the way back to the AFC Championship. However, they would lose in said AFC Championship 24-21. Stewart did not play fantastic. However, the game was still kept close, even with his struggles. He accounted for all 4 Steelers turnovers that day, throwing 3 interceptions and losing a fumble. In the next season, the Steelers would also take a massive step back. They had lost offensive coordinator Chan Gailey in free agency, who was going to become the next coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and had hired new OC Ray Sherman to replace him. The Steelers would also lose their leading receiver from the year prior, Yancey Thigpen, along with 3 of their starting offensive linemen in free agency. Cordell would struggle mightily in '98, 2,500 yards, 11 touchdowns, 18 interceptions, along with 406 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. It is also worth mentioning that the Steelers were 7-4 and in the playoff race at a point in the season before the team went on a 5-game losing streak to completely remove themselves from that. In the '99 season, Ray Sherman would be gone, being replaced by Kevin Gilbride as offensive coordinator. The team was also not very good again, finishing 6-10, even though they were 5-3 halfway through the year. Stewart would see time in 12 games at quarterback. He would throw for 1,464 yards, 6 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and only rush for 258 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mike Tomczak would start for 5 games that year, and Stewart would be benched for the upcoming season. In the year of 2000, Bill Cowher would name Tomczak the starting quarterback for the team. They would start out slow, with a 1-3 record to begin the year. Tomczak would get injured in that 3rd game, leading Stewart to become the man under center once again. Stewart would have 1,860 yards, 11 touchdowns, 8 picks, and rush for 436 yards, 7 touchdowns, but fumbling 8 times. However, he would guide the team to a 9-7 finish, barely missing the playoffs by a tiebreaker. Then there was 2001. Stewart would start all 16 games for the team, under new offensive coordinator Mike Mularkey as well, and new QB coach, more importantly, Tom Clements. Stewart would throw for 3,100 yards, 14 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, while rushing for 537 yards and 5 touchdowns, winning AFC Offensive Player of the Year. The Steelers would go 13-3, make it all the way to the AFC Championship, but then lose 24-17 to the Patriots. Stewart would again not play well in the AFC Championship, throwing 3 interceptions, leading to an increase of ire among Steelers fans. In 2002, Stewart would start for them at QB once again. However, 3 games into the season, he would be benched for the backup, Tommy Maddox. Stewart would start 2 more games in place of an injured Maddox to keep their playoff hopes alive, but after the year, he would be released by Pittsburgh. In 2003, Stewart would sign with the Chicago Bears to be their presumptive starting quarterback. However, after several poor games, he would be benched for Chris Chandler. He would then come off the bench after Chris Chandler also did not perform well, but after the Bears were eliminated from playoff contention, he would be put on the bench once again for rookie Rex Grossman. Stewart would be released after that season. He would then be signed by the Baltimore Ravens in 2004, serving as the backup for Kyle Boller. He would get released after the season, but then re-signed in 2005, this time to be the backup to Anthony Wright after Boller was injured. He would not throw a pass in his 2 years in Baltimore. However, weirdly enough, in week 10 of 2004, he would actually get some snaps, but as a punter. Baltimore's starting and only punter, Dave Zastudil, I don't know how to pronounce his name, forgive me, had gotten injured in the 2nd quarter of the game. Head coach Brian Billick knew that Stewart had punted often in high school and had pooch kicked it exactly once for the Steelers in 1998. That was good enough for him. So Cordell Stewart had to come in for the rest of the game at punter. He would punt 5 times in the rest of the game, including 2 inside of the 20, which also included a very, very clutch punt that pinned them to the Jets' own 9 in overtime. The Jets would go 3 and out, give the ball back to the Ravens, and they would win the game. Stewart would win AFC Special Teams Player of the Week for his efforts. However, after that, his NFL career was officially over. He did try out for several teams, but nothing came of it. He expressed the idea of a comeback in 2009, but nothing came of that either. In the year of 2012, with him technically still being a free agent, even though he had worked as a sports personality in Atlanta for several years, he would go back to Heinz Field one more time to officially retire from the NFL as a Pittsburgh Steeler. And now, here's what I think is the most interesting part of the story: the comparisons and the what-ifs. First of all, Cordell Stewart, you have to recognize, was playing in a transition era for this Pittsburgh team, even though they were still very, very good. And you also have to consider, for the first 2 years of his career, he was that slash player. Bill Cowher had a lot of great qualities as a coach. Quarterback mentoring and development was not one of them. You have to consider that this guy rubbed Ben Roethlisberger the wrong way, And even then, it's, not hard to think that Roethlisberger was a miles better quarterback than Stewart. Let's also not forget the fact that Pittsburgh had 4 offensive coordinators in the span of 5 years. That is not good for any young quarterback. Think of Marcus Mariota as a more modern example of what offensive instability can do for a team. And especially not good for one that was considered a project, having the athleticism but not really the mental side of the quarterback position developed. And even then, it was kind of no secret that Cordell Stewart actually, despite all the turnovers and whatnot, made the Steelers' offense better. He was not the only reason, I'm not that stupid. But guys like Jerome Bettis, Hines Ward, and Yancey Thigpen all agreed that Cordell Stewart was a major asset for them to have in their primes. Yancey Thigpen said that the best balls ever thrown to him in the NFL level, considering that this guy also played with, Steve McNair and a host of other quarterbacks, came from Cordell Stewart, which I find very interesting. Cordell was also, of course, out of his time for the position of quarterback. Nowadays, he would have gone in the first round, and he would have been invested as a quarterback from the get-go. Athletic, with a rocket arm and sweet feet. There's so many teams out there that would absolutely kill to have a guy like that. The comparison to Taysom Hill in the modern era also had to be made, as he was the original, to be fair. He was the original guy that was sort of positionless, which led him to become sort of a folk hero and a fan favorite in Pittsburgh for his first 2 years as the slash position. And you gotta think, what would have happened if he wasn't as insistent on being a full-time quarterback? What if he had stayed as that slash role for his entire career? What would have happened in the development of the NFL and positions to follow? I find that a weirdly interesting argument. Well, we honestly will never really know. Well, and that's why I make these videos. It's fun to think about. Many of all these things have made Cordell Stewart an especially controversial figure in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was always never enough to get them over the top, and in a place such as Pittsburgh, your rings are your worth. Unfair as that may be, but it's true. His play on the field, though, if nothing else, was absolutely electric. He went from that slash role, he went from a fan favorite to their starting quarterback, and the crazy ups and downs of that career, to eventually being gone and retiring as a Pittsburgh Steeler in 2012. You can say what you want about Slash on the field, and you'd probably be right and wrong. It's just your opinion. I'm not here to judge, I just make the vids. Think to yourself, maybe, just for a few seconds after this video ends, just have this permeate in your brain for a second. What if? Alright, and after that, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I promise I'll upload consistently, but Thanksgiving week at work is always crazy. I say always crazy like I haven't worked there for 4 months. Alright, and with that, I will be signing off for now. Deuces.